He was worth more than most countries. At 40. How? The government spent decades trying to stop him. Investigators, journalists, the Supreme Court itself. They all thought they won. None of them did. Here's what nobody tells you. The day his empire was legally destroyed, his personal wealth increased. Not slightly, dramatically. He owned the companies that replaced his company. Every single one. 34 fragments of a broken monopoly, and he held a piece of each. The punishment made him richer than the crime. But that's not even the disturbing part. The disturbing part is what came next. The money didn't stay in oil. It moved into banks, into universities, into the institutions that decided what your doctors learned and what your children were taught. Quietly, permanently, without a single vote. One question has followed this story for over a century. Was this the greatest business mind in history? Or the most sophisticated power grab the modern world has ever seen? The answer is in the documents. And it's not what you expect. Stay until the end. Because the last 60 seconds of this video will change how you see everything. The document was dated 1892. It had never been made public. And the number printed on the third page, the net worth of a single living man, was larger than the entire GDP of most countries on Earth. I stared at it for a long time. Not because I didn't believe it, because I did. Let me give you some context. In 1870, John D. Rockefeller was 31 years old. He had a small oil refinery in Cleveland, Ohio. 40 employees, modest offices, a quiet reputation as a careful, methodical businessman. Nothing about him suggested what was coming. Nothing about anyone suggested what was coming. Because what happened next didn't look like a rise to power. It looked like a natural disaster. By 1880, just 10 years later, Rockefeller controlled 90% of all oil refined in the United States. Not 40%, not 60%, 90%. The entire country ran on oil he processed, transported, and priced. And he was still only 41 years old. Historians call this aggressive expansion. But that phrase doesn't capture it, because aggression implies someone fighting back. No one was fighting back. At the time, most people assumed it was simply talent. Later, investigators would call it something else entirely. Here's what made it strange. Other businessmen of that era were brilliant too. Carnegie, Morgan, Vanderbilt. These were not ordinary men. Yet none of them achieved what Rockefeller achieved. In the speed he achieved it. So the question investigators kept returning to was simple. Why him? What was different? In 1868, 2 years before he founded Standard Oil, Rockefeller met quietly with executives from the Erie Railroad. The meeting wasn't recorded in any public register. No press, no announcements, just a private conversation between a young refinery owner and one of the most powerful transportation networks in America. What was discussed in that room would not become fully clear for another 30 years. At the time, it seemed like a routine business meeting. It wasn't. Standard Oil was incorporated in 1870. Within 3 years, Rockefeller had absorbed 22 of his 26 competitors in Cleveland. Not through better product, not through lower prices, at least not in the way you'd expect. He approached each competitor with the same offer. Sell to me at my price, or compete with me. Those who refused to sell discovered something unusual. Their shipping costs suddenly doubled. Their suppliers became unavailable. Their railroad access became unreliable. It wasn't random. It was surgical. One refinery owner, a man named Robert Hanna, later testified before Congress. He said Rockefeller's representative came to his office and placed a single sheet of paper on his desk. It listed Hanna's debts, his contracts, his rail agreements, information that was supposed to be private. "He knew everything," Hanna said. "Before I spoke a single word, he already knew everything." That detail, a man who always seemed to know more than he should, would surface again and again throughout this story. In boardrooms, in courtrooms, in government hearings. It seemed at first like exceptional intelligence. Later, the explanation would be far more deliberate. Here is what standard history books describe. John D. Rockefeller built Standard Oil through hard work, discipline, and superior business instincts. Here is what the documents suggest. He didn't outcompete the market. He replaced it. There's a difference. Competition assumes equal access to the same tools. What Rockefeller had, from almost the very beginning, were tools no one else could access. And the source of those tools was never fully explained in public. By 1882, Standard Oil had been restructured into something new, a trust, a legal mechanism so unusual that most lawyers had never encountered it. It allowed Rockefeller to control dozens of companies simultaneously, without appearing to own them. On paper, they were independent. In reality, they answered to one office, one man. And the man in that office had just realized something important. He didn't need to own the oil anymore. He needed to own the system that moved it. There was a term used inside Standard Oil, never written down, never officially recorded, spoken quietly, between executives, in rooms that weren't logged. They called it the advantage. It took investigators years to understand what it meant. When they finally did, everything looked different. To understand the advantage, you need one fact about the oil industry in 1870s America. Oil without transportation was worthless. You could drill it, refine it, store it. But without railroad access, you had nothing. The railroads were the market. Rockefeller saw this before anyone else. And then he did something no one thought was possible. He made the railroads work against everyone who used them. In 1872, Rockefeller negotiated a private arrangement with 3 of the largest railroad companies in the country. It was called the South Improvement Company. No public announcements, no government filings anyone could easily find, just a contract. Inside that contract was a clause that should have been illegal. For every barrel Standard Oil shipped, Rockefeller paid a reduced rate. His competitors paid full price. But there was a second clause, a quieter one. For every barrel his competitors shipped, the railroads paid Rockefeller a percentage of their freight revenue. His rivals were financing his expansion. Every time they moved oil, he got paid. When this was later read aloud during a congressional hearing, one senator stopped the witness mid-sentence, asked him to repeat it. The room went silent. "You're telling me his competitors were paying him to compete against them?" "Yes," the witness said. "That is exactly what I'm telling you." His name was Frank Rockefeller, John's own brother. Frank had built a shipping business independently. No favors, no family arrangement. By 1872, he was profitable. Then his railroad rates changed. Without notice, without explanation. His costs doubled. His contracts collapsed. He went to John directly. John's response, according to Frank's own written account, was quiet, almost kind. "Sell to me, or don't. The rates won't change either way." Frank didn't sell. Frank lost everything. They didn't speak for over a decade. What happened to Frank wasn't personal. That's what made it so effective. The same conversation, the same offer, the same outcome. repeated across Ohio, Pennsylvania, New York. Different names, identical result. And Rockefeller, by every account, never raised his voice. The system did it for him. By 1879, Standard Oil controlled 90% of U.S. refining capacity. By 1882, it was restructured into the Standard Oil Trust. 41 companies, operating as one, controlled by a 9-man board. 8 of those men were Rockefeller's direct appointments. The 9th was Rockefeller himself. No shareholder could challenge him. No competitor could access the same infrastructure. It wasn't a monopoly in the traditional sense. It was something more precise, a system with no visible entrance and no exit. There was one person who had been watching all of this. Not a senator, not a rival businessman, a journalist. She had spent 2 years collecting names, dates, leaked shipping records, and testimony from men too afraid to speak publicly. Her editor said the story was too large. She said that was exactly why it had to be told. What she uncovered, and what it actually triggered, was not what anyone expected. History remembers Rockefeller's competitors as men who lost to a better businessman. The records tell a different story. Many of them were skilled, experienced, capitalized. They lost because the rules they believed they were playing by didn't apply to them, only to him. You cannot fight a system you cannot see. And Rockefeller had spent years making certain no one could see it. But in 1900, something shifted. A woman walked into a small editorial office in New York. She placed a stack of documents on the desk. Shipping contracts, internal memos, witness statements. Her editor looked at the pile and told her it was dangerous. She told him she'd been working on it for 2 years and wasn't stopping now. Her name was Ida Tarbell, and what she published next forced the most powerful man in America to finally step into the light. He had survived everything. He had never faced anything like this. Ida Tarbell never set out to destroy Standard Oil. She set out to understand it. That distinction mattered, because what she built wasn't an attack. It was something far more dangerous. A mirror. Her father had been an oil producer in Pennsylvania. She watched him lose everything in the 1870s. Slowly, quietly, without explanation. The rates changed, the contracts disappeared, the business collapsed. No one told him why. She was a teenager when it happened. She never forgot it. By 1900, she was one of the most respected investigative journalists in America. And she had just been given unlimited time and resources by McClure's magazine to answer one question. How did one man take control of an entire industry? And why did no one stop him? She didn't approach it emotionally. She approached it like an engineer. 5 years. 19 published articles. She interviewed former Standard Oil employees, railroad executives, competing refinery owners. She obtained internal documents that were never meant to leave the company. Shipping ledgers, private correspondence, rate agreements. Some sources met her in locations they chose, not she. Some refused to give their names. What were they afraid of, 20 years after the fact? One former Standard Oil manager agreed to speak. He described the internal culture in one sentence. "We didn't think of it as wrong," he said. "We thought of it as efficient." That quote appeared in print in November 1902. Within a week, Standard Oil's legal team had identified the source. The man was quietly dismissed from his next position 6 months later. Coincidence? The timing made people ask. By 1904, Tarbell's full investigation was published as a book. The History of the Standard Oil Company, 900 pages, fully sourced. legally precise. It became an immediate national sensation. Presidents read it. Senators cited it in hearings. The public, for the first time, saw the system mapped in full. The railroad agreements, the rebate structure, the trust mechanism, all of it, in plain language. If the system had been invisible before, it wasn't anymore. Rockefeller did not respond publicly. Not once. He continued his daily routine, attended church, played golf. When journalists asked for comment, his office declined. Why wasn't he afraid? That question bothered investigators more than anything else. A man facing the largest public scandal in American business history. And he appeared completely calm. What did he know that everyone else didn't? There was one detail buried in Tarbell's research that received almost no attention at the time. A footnote, a single paragraph. It described how Standard Oil's assets had been quietly restructured in the years before the investigation went public. Ownership had shifted. Holdings had moved, as if someone had anticipated what was coming. At the time, it looked like routine corporate reorganization. Later, it would look like something else entirely. Ida Tarbell's investigation triggered a federal antitrust case. In 1911, the Supreme Court ruled that Standard Oil must be broken apart. 34 separate companies. The public called it a victory. Tarbell herself was celebrated as the woman who brought down the most powerful monopoly in history. But here is what the financial records show. In the months after the breakup, John D. Rockefeller's personal wealth increased. Not slightly, significantly. The empire had been dismantled. The court had ruled. The companies had been separated. And the man at the center of it all was quietly becoming richer than he had ever been. How? Because he still owned shares in every single company created from the breakup. 34 fragments of Standard Oil, and he held a piece of each one. The destruction of his monopoly had multiplied his wealth. And nobody, not Tarbell, not Congress, not the Supreme Court, had seen it coming. In 1911, the United States government did something unprecedented. It forcibly dismantled the largest corporation in American history. The press called it a landmark victory. The public celebrated. And John D. Rockefeller played golf. Why wasn't he angry? The Supreme Court ruling was unanimous. Standard Oil of New Jersey was to be broken into 34 independent companies. No appeals, no delays. Reporters gathered outside Rockefeller's estate expecting a statement, a reaction, anything. His assistant appeared at the door. Mr. Rockefeller has no comment. He was on the golf course by noon. Had he already known the outcome before the verdict was read? Here is what the headlines said in May 1911. Standard Oil broken apart. Monopoly destroyed. Here is what the financial records said. 6 months later, Rockefeller owned shares in every single one of the 34 successor companies. Not a symbolic stake. Controlling positions. When those 34 companies began trading independently on the open market, their combined value exceeded Standard Oil's pre-breakup valuation. The destruction of his empire had made him wealthier than the empire itself. How do you lose everything and end up with more? One financial analyst at the time, a man named B.C. Forbes, who would later found Forbes magazine, attempted to calculate Rockefeller's net worth after the breakup. He published his estimate, then quietly revised it upward 3 months later, then revised it again. The number kept growing, each revision larger than the last. Here is what investigators eventually understood. Rockefeller had not simply owned Standard Oil. He had owned the architecture beneath it, the pipelines, the storage facilities, the chemical patents. When the company split, those assets didn't disappear. They were distributed across the 34 new entities. But the ownership of those assets remained concentrated in one place, with one man. The government had broken the visible structure. The invisible one was untouched. Did the Supreme Court understand what it had actually ruled on? Among the 34 companies created from the breakup, 3 names stand out: Standard Oil of New York, Standard Oil of California, Standard Oil of Indiana. You may not recognize those names today, but you know their descendants: Mobil, Chevron, Amoco. Companies that would go on to shape the entire second half of the 20th century. All of them fragments of something Rockefeller had built. All of them originally still connected to the same ownership structure. Does that sound like a defeat? By 1913, 2 years after the breakup, Rockefeller's personal fortune had reached what historians estimate as the equivalent of $400 billion in today's terms. That figure is contested. Some historians say it's higher. The precise number is difficult to calculate, because by that point, the wealth had begun moving into structures that weren't designed to be calculated. Foundations, trusts, private holdings. Why would someone with nothing to hide make their finances this difficult to trace? In 1913, the same year his wealth peaked in oil, Rockefeller made a quiet decision. He began transferring significant assets into a new vehicle, not a company, not a bank, a foundation, the Rockefeller Foundation. Publicly, it was described as philanthropy, a wealthy man giving back. But foundations, unlike corporations, are not subject to the same disclosure requirements. They operate in a different kind of silence, and silence, as this story has shown repeatedly, was never accidental. The breakup of Standard Oil is taught in schools as the moment American government proved it could control unchecked corporate power. A clean story, a satisfying ending. But the documents suggest a different reading. The breakup didn't reduce Rockefeller's power. It dispersed it, spread it across 34 entities, multiple industries, and legal structures designed to outlast any single investigation. He didn't lose control in 1911. He upgraded it, and the new version was invisible in ways the old one never was. By 1920, Standard Oil was gone, but the money and the influence it carried had not disappeared. It had moved into banks, into universities, into medical institutions, into the organizations that shaped how entire generations would think, learn, and live. This was no longer the story of one man and one company. This was something larger, and it was only beginning. The oil was gone. The company was gone. The courtroom battle was over. But if you knew where to look, nothing had actually ended. Before we go further, I want you to do something. Look at everything we've covered so far. One man, one system, one carefully engineered collapse that wasn't a collapse at all. And ask yourself honestly, was this genius or was this control? Leave one word in the comments right now. Genius. If you believe Rockefeller was simply the most intelligent businessman in history. Control. If you believe what he built was never really about business at all. There's no right answer, but your instinct matters here, because what I'm about to show you might change it. By 1920, John D. Rockefeller had formally retired from business. The press accepted this at face value. A wealthy man, old age, stepping back. But retirement, for Rockefeller, looked different than it did for anyone else. While he played golf and attended church, his money was quietly rebuilding itself into something the antitrust laws had never anticipated. What do you do with more wealth than any government can legally dismantle? You stop putting it in companies. The Rockefeller Foundation was established in 1913. Its stated mission: improving the well-being of humanity. And it did extraordinary things. It funded the eradication of hookworm across the American South. It financed medical schools that defined modern healthcare. It shaped university curricula across 3 continents. But here is the question no one asked loudly enough. Who decides what improving humanity means? Foundations don't answer to shareholders. They don't answer to voters. They answer to their boards. And the boards answered to the family. By 1930, Rockefeller money had touched the University of Chicago, Johns Hopkins medical programs, the League of Nations health infrastructure, and one more thing: the land beneath the United Nations headquarters in New York City. Donated by the Rockefeller family in 1946, a gift or a permanent address, depending on how you read it. John D. Rockefeller died in 1937. He was 97 years old, but the architecture he had built didn't slow down. His son, his grandsons, his foundations. Each generation moved the influence further from visibility, further from accountability, further from any single name or face. At what point does inherited power stop being a family story and become something structural? Today, the companies descended from Standard Oil's 1911 breakup represent trillions in combined market value. The foundations carry endowments measured in billions. The family name appears on buildings, institutions, and policy organizations across 6 continents. And yet, no one voted for any of it. No election determined it. No court approved it. It simply continued. Here is what makes this story difficult. Rockefeller built hospitals, funded universities, eliminated diseases. The positive impact is real, documented, undeniable. But impact and intention are not the same thing. And the question this story keeps returning to, the one that has no clean answer, is this: when one family shapes medicine, education, and international policy across multiple generations, is that philanthropy? Or is it governance without election? The empire of oil was broken in 1911. That part is true, but the system beneath it, the architecture of influence, the foundations, the institutions, the quietly held positions, that was never broken. It was never even challenged. It simply became harder to see. And the things you cannot see are always the ones that shape you most.